I welcome you to the Messiah channel. We are an end time channel and we speak the truth because the truth will set us free. And today's message, we are looking at the journey from Egypt, the first Egypt, to another Egypt. And we are speaking the truth and we are doing an awakening for the children of God who are waiting for the Messiah, waiting for him to come and establish his kingdom. There are so many lies that have been told. There are so many distortions that have been made to the point that a lot of people have lost their faith. They lost their confidence and they lost the trust, and they lost interest in the Bible. They lost interest in Christianity. They lost interest in their own history. So today, I would like to go back to Egypt, and we are going to ancient Egypt. So many distortions. And the first question we ask is, who were the people who were in ancient Egypt? And what color were they? The color of the skin? And you say, why are you bringing skin color in discussion? And I would say that skin color has always been in the discussion when we talk about Egypt. And why is that so? It's because of the ancient Egyptian civilization. There was a time that everybody wanted to go to Egypt to see the civilization, to see the wonders of Egypt. And you can see that some of the 7 wonders of the world were located in Egypt. Egypt had civilization unparalleled in the world, and which race of people were behind that civilization. And the testimony of ancient historians say that the people who were in ancient Egypt were black people, i.e., Negroes. And you know that Herodotus, the Greek historian who they call the father of history, acknowledged 3 times in his book that the people of ancient Egypt were black. And if the people of ancient Egypt were black, who were responsible for the great civilization that occurred in Egypt? There have been so many distortions, and even though Socrates and Herodotus and Aristotle, all of them acknowledged that people in ancient Egypt were black, there came a time when European scholars, out of racial prejudice, did not want to believe that. And if you study philosophy, let me tell you that philosophy began in ancient Egypt. And if you study any Greek philosophers, let me tell you that those philosophers studied in Egypt. During the time of ancient Egypt, it was very fanciful for people to go to ancient Egypt and study. And Socrates, Aristotle, they all went to ancient Egypt to study, and the records show that the people in ancient Egypt were black, they were Negroes. And because ancient Egypt had this civilization that was so great, Europeans became interested to know more about ancient Egypt. So they studied Egypt and they called themselves Egyptologists. Who is an Egyptologist? An Egyptologist is somebody who studies about Egypt. Remember, they didn't want to associate Egypt with Africa. So they divided Egyptology as if Egypt is not part of Africa. And so when you hear the word Egyptologist, mostly they were Europeans trying to study the secrets and the mysteries of ancient Egypt, and most of them were racially prejudiced. But there were some of them who spoke the truth. One of them is Sir Gardiner. Sir Gardiner, he was Britain's foremost Egyptologist. And he wrote a book in 1961, and he concluded that the people in ancient Egypt were black. If you read about Imhotep, he was a black man, he was an architect, he was a doctor, he was everything, but people don't talk about him because he was an African. When I was in school, elementary school, our teacher taught us the Pythagoras theorem. I like geometry, and I could prove the Pythagoras theorem because I memorized it. And our teacher said it was Pythagoras who developed the Pythagoras theorem. But later on, I came to know that Pythagoras learned his theory from African mathematicians, and the ancient Egyptians were using the principles of Pythagoras theorem 1,000 years before the birth of Pythagoras. So what the Greek mathematician Pythagoras claimed he invented, or he was the author of, ancient black mathematicians had already proved it. Euclid, the world's greatest mathematician in history, you know, he was a black man. What about Hippocrates? When people go to medical school, they graduate, they take an oath. I swear by Hippocrates, I will do A, B, C, and D. And Hippocrates, a Greek physician, is wrongly considered as the father of medicine. Please do your research. The father of medicine is not Hippocrates. He was a black Egyptian. And people don't mention his name. We are still in Egypt. And I was surprised when I read that the Bible that we have was compiled in Egypt. The Bible was not compiled in Israel. It was not compiled in Rome, but it was put together in Egypt. It was translated from Hebrew to Greek. And remember the city in Egypt called Alexandria. It played a major role in the early Christian church. Alexandria is in ancient Egypt. By the way, when we're talking about the Greek philosophers, remember, most of them studied in Africa, and Africans were their teachers, including Aristotle. You also remember that the knowledge that was stored in Egypt was destroyed, or it was stolen, particularly after the Greeks invaded Egypt. And Aristotle got access to a lot of materials from Egypt. The Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, he got a lot of books and manuscripts from Egypt because he was a friend to Alexander the Great, who went to Egypt. So that's how Aristotle got some of his books. And there were a lot of Greek philosophers who even plagiarized the writings of Black Negro Africans. And Aristotle was one of them. He claimed to have written something which later research found out that the thing that he claimed he had written had already been done by a Black philosopher. And I remember that in Greek, they began to persecute the philosophers because the Greek government concluded that philosophy originated from a Black country, Egypt. So the Greek government persecuted Greek philosophers because of the association with philosophy, with Black wisdom in Egypt. Okay, now let's move to Canaan, the land of Canaan. Okay, you remember Noah had 3 sons, and Ham, one of them, and Ham had 4 children, and one of them is Canaan. So when you hear the land of Canaan, that was later occupied by Israel. Canaan was a Black land. And even Babylon was occupied by Black people. And if you read the book of the Bible, Genesis, you read that Father Abraham, his father was from Ur of Chaldees. Ur of Chaldees. Terah was from Ur of Chaldees. And do you know that the people who inhabited the Ur of Chaldees, they were Black people from Canaan, descendants of Canaan. If you want to know more about it, there's a book you have to read, From Babylon to Timbuktu. From Babylon to Timbuktu, a book written by Rudolph Wenshaw. So Babylon, where Abraham lived, Mesopotamia, there were Black people living there, and the land of Canaan was a land inhabited by Black people. Canaan was a son of Ham, a man that many Bible scholars conclude was a Black man. People became so much obsessed with Egypt for several reasons. Number one, because Egypt had civilization that was so advanced. Europe was nowhere. Europe was living in the dark ages when ancient Egypt had civilization spreading from archaeology to medicine to philosophy to any other thing. And so the Europeans did not want the Negroes to be associated with Egypt. Number two, the Exodus. The children of Jacob, they lived in Egypt. And if the people in Egypt in the ancient times were Black, then you conclude that the children of Jacob lived with Black people. And even Joseph, why is it that his brothers couldn't recognize him? Because he was as black as the people living in Egypt. He was as black as the people living in ancient Egypt who are black, as supported by historical evidence. And not only that, the pharaohs, the great Egyptian kings, were they black? Were they white? Remember that Egypt was invaded by the Greeks, the Romans, and later the Arabs. And so the original people in Egypt are not the people who are living there now. And the civilization leading to the pharaohs are well documented. Some time ago, I was in Baltimore, United States. I was at a train station, and I saw the cover of National Geographic, a magazine, Black Pharaohs of Egypt. It was very fascinating. So I bought it, National Geographic, with a cover, Black Pharaohs of Egypt. And when I read it, the researchers confirmed that the ancient Egyptians were black, the pharaohs were black. And they also confirmed that in addition to the Egyptian civilization, there was the civilization of Kush, and also the civilization of Nubia that was also advanced. And remember, Kush is son of the Kush is African. Um, let me tell you, we have Kush, we have Canaan, we have Mizraim, we have Put, sons of Ham. And so there was the Cushian civilization, and most biblical scholars associate Kush with Ethiopia, and some also associate Kush with Sudan. And so if there was a Kushite civilization and a Nubian civilization, they are all African civilization. And so what I'm saying is that the European scholars became offended. Not only European scholars, but European kings, European pastors and priests became offended. And the hatred was intensified during the period of the so-called Renaissance, a time when new ideas came to Europe, and the Europeans painted a lot of portraits, and they painted the portraits white, portraits that were black. And if you want to know the truth, if you are interested in skin color, then watch the two statues of Saint Peter in the Basilica in Rome. And you also have to watch the bronze image of Saint Peter in the Basilica. And you also watch the Black Madonna. Countries like Poland and other nations in the world, particularly those who are members of the Roman Catholic, they worship the Black Madonna. Madonna means Mother of Christ, the Black Mother of Christ, Mary. And so if you see a portrait of Mary that is white, it means it has been whitewashed as a result of the lies that were perpetrated during the period of the Renaissance. And if you read from Timbuktu, from Babylon to Timbuktu, the book written by Rudolf Wenzel, you know how, as a result of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and also as a result of the Assyrian conquest, Black people, Hebrews, moved from Mesopotamia, Babylon, Jerusalem, and settled in Africa, particularly in the so-called slave coast of West Africa. And you have to do research about the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade that resulted in the enslavement of Africans, the enslavement of Negroes, the enslavement of the Hebrews who had fled from Jerusalem and other parts of Babylon to settle in West Africa in a kingdom called the Kingdom of Judah that could be recognized from the ancient maps of West Africa. The map of 1747 shows the Kingdom of Judah in West Africa. And so when you're looking at the slave trade, you see the enslavement of Hebrews to United States. And if you study the slave trade, particularly with regard to Denmark, you will know how Denmark had a fort in Ghana, the White Fort in Ghana, and also had a fort in St. Thomas. Excuse me, the Red Fort in St. Thomas, and Denmark sent slaves to St. John, St. Thomas, St. Croix, the U.S. Virgin Islands. And if you also read history, you will know that the people that were enslaved, they were not just Negroes, they were Hebrews. And I recommend you to read the book written by Ronald Dalton Jr., From Hebrews to Negroes. And so in this video, in a short while, we are looking at Egypt and the civilization that occurred in Egypt and the contribution that Black people made to that civilization, and how the Hebrews migrated to this Negro land, the slave coast of West Africa after the fall of Jerusalem, and how they were enslaved to fulfill the Bible prophecy in Deuteronomy chapter 28, that as a result of disobedience, the children of Judah will be scattered over the world, and they will go in ships. And so that is the subject of our discussion, from Egypt to Egypt, telling the truth, so that the truth will set us free. Thank you for listening to this message.